So welcome to Julila Sott. Um, she's the founder of Gambit Labs, which develops biofeedback-enhanced game for executive function. At Santa Clara University, which is across the bay, she directs the Brain and Memory Care Lab, which with dedicated research on the validation of neuromodulation and digital therapeutics, which means games and XR for health, for cognitive and mental health. Her work also addresses the safety and privacy implications of AI-enabled technology in healthcare in partnership with XRSI, which is an international organization looking into safety and privacy issues. She earned her PhD in neuroscience from UC Davis and advises digital health companies on scientific framework and clinical trials. So let's welcome Julia. You can use the mouse if you want to click. And hold the mic not too close.
Okay. All right. So this is my second to last slide. So let's try to get back to the beginning. This was kind of a hard one to look at for a full minute. There we go. We're in present mode. Okay. All right. Moving right along. So this is just what Natalie shared about me in terms of my background, and my disclosures are there at the bottom. Okay. So one of the things we're really talking about today is how we're bridging the science to the game design. That's really the main point of this this session here. And getting to the point of building Gambit Labs started with the lab, with the Brain and Memory Care Lab. And a handful of years back, I wanted to build something that combined neurofeedback and immersive environments, because I saw it as a way to better intervene and treat skills for people with ADHD, right? Where you have high distractibility, poor self-regulation, and let's put them in an immersive environment and tell them what's happening inside their brain. With that, we built Mandala Flow State. That became an installation at the SF Asian Art Museum. So what I'm putting below this is what the task was, what the objective was, and what the feedback was, and what the experience was like. And these three elements is what goes into every single thing we build. The next thing developed was fluorescence. This was managing emotional arousal, things like fear. And that feedback there was heart rate variability. This one was actually built by high school students. So I got to teach them Unity, teach them how to build biosensors, and how to teach all of that to talk to one another. They made an amazingly creative cave experience that was responsive to your heart rate. Most recently, my team in my lab, along with Madhuri over here, build Fabled Forest. And this is another VR experience that uses gesture control. So no controllers. So trying to get more of that embodied presence. And you are grappling through a rainforest jungle. And along the way, go into different portals where you challenge your stress coping. So from all of that experience in parallel and in sequence, we built Gambit Labs. My founder is Max Sims. One of the key advisors is Tony Simon, who is in the VR lab avoiding this echo, because that was a limit for him. But what we're really doing here is taking this core science as a way to play your way to a stronger brain. And you can replace stronger with any positive adjective you'd like. Okay. As I was describing, building this for ADHD, what you really need to do is bolster executive function. Executive function are all these components of self-regulation. And it's not knowledge. These are skills that really only develop through challenge, practice, and reward. In one way, that's just living life. But we can accelerate that and help people in gaining those skills before we reach those negative consequences of that was listed on the other slide, of regulating with drugs, sinking into depression and anxiety, right? So this is what we're working on. We do this through games, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because it creates a safe and simultaneously stressful learning environment. So you can simulate the challenge with the consequences not being detrimental outside of that controlled environment. Games inherently build in repetition and they build in reward. The scoring systems, the level play, all of these things are basically priming learning circuits. The other aspect is when you bring in that good narrative, as was described before, it makes it a very memorable, closer to episodic experience, and that is our fastest way to learn. So we try to make this playful. Okay? It's been demonstrated over and over how games are good for our brains. If you study gaming populations, you see that they perform better in planning and strategy skills outside of the gaming environment. And that's with the more complex games that someone engages in for weeks or months, or it's an ongoing virtual world. That is planning and strategy. Gamers also demonstrate more efficient thinking. When it says neural networks, basically just means thinking, right? So they're faster at the skills in the game that carry over to the real world as well, because they have practiced it over and over again. When we look at the clinical use of games, we see success in depression and in ADHD. So all of the examples here fall into those two categories. Rejoin took what was previously a repetitious, non-rewarding, emotional reappraisal task and turned it into a game, a mobile game, that improved quality of life to the point that the FDA approved it. Endeavor was developed by Akili, and this has been demonstrated to improve sustained attention, not just for kids, but for adults, not just in the US, but also in Japan. So that's the other aspect of games. It's a language that is universal. Rewire is developing neuroscience-informed games to treat depression. So every single game is linked to a cognitive skill, and not just a cognitive skill, but a cognitive process. So we're confident about what neural networks are engaged in each of the games, so we know what's being taught. Sorry. With immersive games, we're adding on layers that enhance the learning process, in particular, presence and embodiment. So being present in that environment, so not having those distractions, believing you're in that virtual space, enhances your intention and memory. When we use immersive games, we engage the body more fully. So when we look at these examples, virtually, FitBrain, Helium, they are not forgetting the body in that virtual environment. They're taking advantage of it. Every single task in Virtually is having a motor component and a cognitive component. And this is done for assessment and for maintaining cognitive health. Again, shown to work in kids with ADHD and older adults with cognitive decline, with mild cognitive impairment. FitBrain is dual task training. And this is, again, you think and you move. Particularly XR games. So in XR games, you're also challenging the body and doing a more complex motor task. And FitBrain is in the clinic at numerous neurology and aging clinics. Helium isn't quite a game, it's a story. And it integrates both EEG and heart rate to put you into an alternate place to manage stress. Okay? And this is used by NFL teams and everyday people. Where'd my slide go? Okay, there we go. Most recently, Luminosity just last year, they got clearance for their suite of games, not one game. There's about 24 games. And the use of these small mini games over extended periods of time that effectively increase the dosage, essentially practice, increases the psychometric tasks, which is what you're seeing on one side, the TOVA, which is the same test used in every ADHD study, but also measurable clinical improvement in quality of life. So those are those real world things that you're actually making a difference. You're actually changing how the person is thinking without any pharmacology. Okay. So what we're going to continue to talk about here is how to design these biofeedback games. And so the gameplay alone tells you so much about the person's behavior. There's a lot of metrics within that. When you add on a sensor layer, you're making inferences about internal states. And this is where we get the cognitive metrics. So we know if someone is disengaged, we know if they're nervous, right? Without them saying a word. Okay? We can use that to modulate the gameplay, to adjust the difficulty, or to provide reward for regulating that internal state. So this becomes a virtuous cycle when you do it well in order to accelerate the learning and make it basically more playful, more enjoyable. Okay. Going a little deeper on what this tells you, actually, these are all the things I just said. So it is multidimensional. When you're putting sensors on the body, you really get this insight that the individual will never tell you out loud. When you put these pieces together, you can basically build a profile about the person and create adaptive algorithms around that. I'm showing one example here with the company Skillprint, and they only look at gameplay. They're a game analytics company. And from that, they have built basically a personality profile and an assessment of mental state. Okay. Okay. The last layer of this, really building it to health at scale, is thinking about how we design games that build brain capital. And one of the tools I use when I'm designing is a checklist from Positive Computing. Does anyone use that? It's been introduced in the curriculum. I bring it into my class, my design class right now. I said, whatever you're building, put it against this checklist. And it's basically making sure as you're building, are you still building something that serves your end user versus extracting? Okay. And so brain capital falls into this theme of positive computing, because when you design them in that way, games are a brain capital technology. They're using technology to educate, to support mental health, to support the learning process. So it can cut across all of these categories that contribute to brain capital. And if you haven't heard this term yet, you will, because it is touching upon policy. Now at city levels, country levels, there are brain capital strategic plans being set. And while it is the governments that are setting the big objectives and funding and so on, it's individuals that are building the specific solutions. And so what we're building at Gambit falls very close to that layer of brain health in terms of cognitive activity. Right. So now we're here at Gambit Labs. We founded Gambit Labs actually late 2021. And I know it's been a few years, but our active development has been roughly 2.5 years out of those many years. The team we have now is composed of those who have the skills in the clinical, in the health applications, and in the game dev, right? And figuring out how to build a business. And that's honestly the hardest thing. Right? And our mission is to use this construct I just described to increase the resilience, strengthen the mental health of youth. So we're really designing for that 13 to 20. Okay? And so building this stronger brain, right? It's not necessarily you're starting from a deficit, but the brain networks work like muscles that as you use them more, they grow stronger. And when you grow the ones that contribute to self-regulation, and that's what I'm talking about, the constructive adaptation, because anything you do more of will get stronger, right? This is how the gaming addiction, the social media addiction, it occurs. It is an adaptation, but we're trying to promote constructive adaptation. You're engaging those brain networks, and the behavior we're asking you to do falls into executive functions. All right. They're going forward too fast. So first you need to map the executive functions to game types. This is a very simplistic mapping. When you actually go through your product development, it is much, much, much granular. But puzzles, you can think about how that uses flexible thinking. It practices your working memory. In any simulation, you have to plan and strategize. You have to be aware of what you're doing, that's self-monitoring. In open worlds, where it's not just one specific objective, right? You have to have an organization of that world. You have to create your own tasks and so on. The active shooter games, and I didn't have a better word for this, but this is a big control built system that is testing your reactivity in real time. So it's really a good exercise in emotional control and impulse control. So coming back to this diagram, in terms of what Gambit Labs has been building, right? For our biosensors, we are using both heart rate and brain activity, everything collected on consumer devices. And we'll be able to see these during the demo. The cognitive metrics that we're extracting from that have to do with arousal. So arousal just means how calm or nervous you are, how focused you are, and what type of focus. So that selective sustained attention, which is a little bit different than flow, with that, we can talk about that one-on-one and where those differences are. And as we're collecting those during the gameplay, we are then modifying the game mechanics and the visual effects. Our games run on both mobile and VR because they're inherently spatial. Okay? And this is part of the breadth of skills to train. They're not skills to help you stare at a screen, right? They are skills to help you exist in the full world. Okay? The reward component is the modulation of the gameplay score by the cognitive metrics, and the cognitive metrics modulating the gameplay to make it feel more rewarding, okay? And build that awareness of what your internal states are, which is practicing interoception. Okay? So the other aspect of our game design is that they're not purely cognitive skills. Right? It's not just increasing the number of digits you can remember. It's the emotional component as well. And very few of the games out there combine these two things in the gameplay and in the metrics. Yep. All right. So Natural Bridges is actually our game 2. I'll give you a post view to our game 1. But with Natural Bridges, we're practicing visual spatial attention and impulse control, right? And flexible thinking. Okay. So the basic task is you're scanning your environment in order to collect the butterflies, and you're penalized if you hit the dragonflies, right? So you have to evaluate and make a decision in relatively rapid sequence, because these butterflies will disappear. They spawn for a particular period of time. Different butterflies have different rates of fluttering, right? So you're rewarded for catching them, but if you're doing this in a manner where you're more focused, the sky will turn more purple. In addition, those butterflies will begin to cluster together near you, so they become easier to catch. Okay? So this is that multiple layers of reward. And after the gameplay, you have the full analytics from the actual game metrics and the timeline of the biometrics. So if someone's starting to play the game, if you come do the demo, there we go. Okay. On the mobile version, it looks like this. You have multiple environments you can select from, and it doesn't matter which you choose, because the difficulty level is going to be determined by what your previous gameplay was, what your brain state is when you come in, so that the tuning of the play is just right. Okay? In that next scene, you see that scanning of the environment and then what your dashboard looks like on the phone. We are also building this for VR. And so in the VR version, the movement is more naturalistic, but the game mechanics and the algorithms are the same. The first one we built was focal rescue. And the main lessons learned here in this fully immersive one is that it's really difficult for someone to learn to play a game when the actual game controls are your brain activity. That was asking just a step too far. So we have the key gameplay now is with volitional control, with your tapping on the screen and so on, and then modulated by brain activity. In this particular game, the target you're trying to find only becomes visible when you're in a highly focused state. So it's a process. And again, we're doing this because if we don't reach this age group effectively, if we just tell people to be more self-controlled, to be happier, to not do this or not do that, we naturally find other ways to cope. And so it's going from being an anxious person to an anxiety disorder. It's moving into high-risk behaviors that can cause you harm, substance use, and in the situations that are most extreme, and it's not rare, you do have suicide risk. And that's what we really, really want to prevent. So the team that is building this is myself and Max as founders. Ash Mahdi has built everything you see here. Monica Fan is our lead advisor and is big on accessibility, so that everything we do works well in a neurodivergent population. Lynn is helping us actually build the business. Tony Simon is guiding us on how to build a digital health platform. Ian was one of our really good advisors who passed away in October. So this is what we're up to. Thanks for listening.
We have time for one question. We are a bit late. Yeah.
Through your work, have you found any potential ways that the technology can be used to identify or diagnose ADHD in addition to treating?
Using EEG, even at resting states, so doing no task, you can differentiate between someone with ADHD and not. So that is absolutely possible, especially when you have more sensors. It is not our goal to do a diagnostic role, but yeah, there are definitely tools to do that, and also the patterns of gameplay and eye tracking. Any one of those independently can help you identify a group with ADHD.
Thank you again.